on creating the deer exposures in a number of our towns, and I worked very closely with him, and I was the Weston conservation agent for 12 years, and so he was he was on the Concom Conservation Commission when we initiated the deer management program there. So he was
great.
And also environmental studies professor from Brandeis, now retired. So he's joining too, just last minute he told me, so that's great.
I'm excited.
Yeah, and I thank you all for coming on. I don't do a waiting room because stuff like this is fun for people to pop on, but I'm also so impressed at people who are actually 5 minutes early for a Zoom.
Yeah.
God, I can't save myself from actually being on time to Zoom. I'm always the 2 minute after. Yeah. So I'm super impressed that on a Friday morning we have all these non-procrastinators coming on. So hey Janet, good to see you. So Allie, do you usually with these I suggest people write questions in the chat as you present, and then I can help with the chat question and answer at the end. Does that work for you?
Yeah, that sounds great. I guess my only request is to save questions till the end, which is pretty straightforward because I'll cover a lot of things throughout. But yeah, totally. I'm fine with chat questions, and any format works for me.
Yeah, good. So yeah, I'll let people know that they can enter their questions in the chat as you speak if they are afraid they're going to forget. And then at the end of your presentation, we can go through those, or certainly people can raise their hands and call on them. It's not that big of a group today, so that's great.
Awesome.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you, Allie.
Thank you for being
here. Good to see you, Ellie. Ellie is a retired Mass Wildlife staffer. You did education coordination, right, Ellie?
That's right. Chief of Information and Education.
Oh, that's so nice.
And a Concord resident now, and is very interested in seeing some type of, Concord approach to deer management, but also regional approach to deer management. Really is, quite important to think about these wildlife populations regionally, which Massachusetts doesn't do. I know. Do other states? Actually, I don't even know how other states do it. It's probably a lot of county stuff that happens in other states.
Yeah, it's very different everywhere, and especially when you zoom out globally, everybody's got a different way of doing things.
I bet. Well, we do like to all be our own little kingdoms, Massachusetts.
Especially in Massachusetts.
Oh yeah. We're just no. I'm just kidding. Great. We're getting lots of people zooming in. Good to see folks. We're just gonna wait a couple minutes, obviously, to get started. I'm seeing Ellie drink water. I don't have water. I want to grab some water, so I'll be back in 1 minute.
Got it.
Hi, Ellie.
Hi, guys. Thank you so much for joining. I'm really excited to share my research with you guys, and it looks like we'll have a good crowd.
We're excited to hear what you found.
Awesome. So it sounds like you guys are residents and work within Massachusetts mainly, or are there other communities like in New York here too, do you know?
I don't know all the names of people because people are inviting friends, and that's wonderful. Yeah. But the core of this group is a group based in Concord and Lincoln and surrounding towns saying, we have an issue here. Yeah. How are we going to address it?
Okay. Got it.
All righty. Still got a minute to go before we hit the 11 o'clock dot.
Right, and I think we have a few more people from Concord DNR coming in.
Totally. Okay. And we can always give it, I usually give it a couple minutes anyways. So I'll tell you my favorite deer story from today. I have favorite deer stories every day, but I was driving into Lincoln today, and and Stacy Carter, my colleague, knows this area quite well, but I was on a road called Weston Road, and it's right on the Lincoln-Weston line. And there's a pretty nice cart path that goes into the woods, and we do have a dusting of snow, so it's everything white and pretty. As I'm driving by, I look down this trail cart path, and standing in the middle of it is this huge deer. Of course, I thought female, but actually they might have lost their antlers by now, so maybe it could have been a male. But it was just like this stoic, just rural deer view in wintertime. And we certainly have plenty of deer sightings this time of year, as the snow is now lightly covering things, and so we're seeing deer tracks everywhere. We're going to wait a minute. We start getting a few people on. We have time for one more deer story.
I'm going to say give it until 3 minutes after.
All right, then we get 2 favorite deer stories. Anyone have a deer sighting recently that they want to share?
Just beautiful deer.
I can share a deer story. I did my master's work in Texas at Texas A&M, and my field station was in this little town called Port Mansfield, and we stayed in trailers because we had to go out and access these remote areas. And there were so many deer there, and like one doe, I assume they weren't all hers, but she would have like 5 fawns trailing behind her. And it was just this kind of communal deer raising system, and they'd eat out of your hands, which people obviously acclimated them to do that, but they were basically pets. It was pretty crazy. I've never seen so many deer. Wild, technically.
Nice. Yes, I just had one this morning myself with the squirrels around in my backyard that I was feeding, and all of a sudden my focus went into the background, into the woods there, and there stood a deer right there. That made my day right there.
Nice.
I'm from Carlisle, by the way. I'm Shane Usher. I'm from the Land Stewardship Committee.
Oh, great.
Welcome, Shane.
Thank you. I did debate whether we would do introductions, but we have such a large group, and Allie has so much to share that I think we're going to pause on doing introductions. But obviously, we've got the Google Doc that has everyone's name and affiliation, so that's always a good time to sort of connect with others that you might not be familiar with. And after this talk, I will certainly send that out again. Allie has agreed to allow us to record this. So it will be recorded so you can share it with other folks. And
thank you, Allie.
Oh, yeah.
And we will, I think, have some good discussion after Allie's presentation. So I'll likely mention this again, but what we'll do during Allie's presentation, if people have questions, is they can put it in the chat or keep it in their minds. After the presentation, Allie will open it up to discussion. So that's kind of the framework for today. And it looks like we've got 25 people, which is way more than what's on my Google Drive, my Google Doc. So just be sure, if you want follow-up information, I'll put it in the chat, the Google Doc. That's where I send email blasts out after this. So if you have not registered, typed your name in, an email address onto the Google Doc, add it there, and that's how we'll share this information out with folks. So with that, I think, Ellie, we can get started. I want to welcome everyone. I'm Michelle Grisenda. I'm the Link Conservation Director, and I've been here 3 years. Prior to that, I was in Weston, and prior to that, I was in Framingham. And in both my employments with Framingham and Weston, I happened to be the conservation agent when we started deer management programs. And it's been kind of fascinating with my career now, 20 plus years of municipal conservation work, just to think about the difference of the deer population over time. When I grew up in Southern Mass, never saw a deer. And of course now it is a near dearly occurrence in many of our towns. And it's also a fascinating discussion about the complex balance between deer wildlife populations and people's perception of wildlife, both in terms of their enjoyment of observing them, but also the potential impacts that certain wildlife like deer have on our understory. And so balancing those needs of wildlife management with our enjoyment of the animal, and also just thinking about the biological impacts that happen as a result of too many deer in this case. So we have today Allie. Is it Kohler? Is that how you say last name?
Yep, that's right.
Awesome. I'm going to give a quick bio on Allie, who's going to be discussing a multi-year effort that she's been working on in this particular topic. The topic today is agent-based model explorations of white-tailed deer management in the northeastern U.S. And Allie is a graduate of Colorado State University with a PhD in ecology and recent, right? Just like
Very
December?
Recent. Yep, December, yep.
Congratulations. She's built a career blending her love for nature with academic rigor. Before her PhD, she studied birds for her master's program at Texas A&M and earned her undergraduate degree in natural resources conservation and biology in northern Wisconsin. Alongside her academic pursuits, Allie enjoys expressing her passion for nature through painting. She recently accepted a position as a wildlife biologist at the National Wildlife Research Center in Fort Collins, Colorado, where she will focus on developing sustainable, non-lethal methods for managing human-wildlife conflict. So welcome, Allie.
Thank you.
And before we get started, I do see Janet has her hand raised, so I'll just see what's up with Janet.
Oh, yeah. Hi. I'm taking minutes on the meeting, and I have a list of all the people that were registered as of about 9 last night. But if you registered after that, I guess maybe, do you have the list of registration?
Yeah. So, this is just the background, and I forgot to press record, which I'm really bummed about. But that's okay. I'll do that in a minute. But so just so people understand what Janet is referring to, this original time slot was a scheduled meeting with a group of Concord and Lincoln staff and residents who have been meeting for maybe a year at this point about the deer issues. And so I had offered to bring Allie into that conversation, and then also offered to invite a lot of other people who have been working on this topic. There is a group from Metro West who have been working on monitoring these deer exposures that are put up in a number of our towns. And then there's also a number of just nonprofits who are interested in this topic. And so this is sort of a multi-group discussion here. So in terms of Janet, your minute taking, we'll be recording this as well. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. And I did ask everyone to add their name on the RSVP Google Doc so that we would be able to share info from them. So that is available, and it should be pretty comprehensive on that.
Great. Thank you.
So, no problem. So what I'm going to do now is hit record, and I'll just say the title again. I won't do the bio, and then I'll welcome Allie again. So let me hit this.
Recording in progress.
Okay. So hello, everyone. We're here today with Allie Kohler, who is going to be speaking about agent-based model explorations of white-tailed deer management in the northeastern U.S. And welcome, Allie.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle, for the introduction. And thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to share my research with you today. And before I start, I just want to mention that you can leave comments, questions in the chat as I go, and we'll address them at the end. And I also want to just point out before I begin that as a scientist, I'm approaching this research with the most unbiased perspective as possible. So I don't have an opinion one way or the other, but if I say something that you maybe think is more opinionated, feel free to ask me at the end, what evidence is guiding that opinion. And I'm going to share my screen with you guys. Okay. And there we go. Oops.
Have by chance? Oh, I do. A fall. They used to have a fall.
A clean one or
let's see if we can mute everybody.
They can't hear me.
Okay.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and begin then. So thank you guys all for joining us today. I'm really excited to share my research with you on exploring the digital forest, white-tailed deer management modeling for a sustainable future. And I wanted to start by sharing some background about white-tailed deer history in America. although I'm sure a lot of you or most of you are very familiar with this. I'll keep it brief. And throughout this presentation, when I say deer, I'm referring to white-tailed deer. This species was historically abundant across the country, but they experienced substantial declines in distribution and abundance around the early 1900s, largely due to habitat loss and unregulated market hunting. But successful restoration efforts, the removal of predators, and the fact that deer can reproduce very rapidly have all resulted in the skyrocketing deer numbers that we know today. Now, deer are arguably the most popular game species in the US and are often considered a symbol of the American wilderness. As human and deer numbers have expanded simultaneously across the country, the amount of human-deer interactions have increased within these coupled natural human systems. And as we know, this can sometimes lead to a variety of conflicts. Overabundant deer populations can lead to negative impacts on vegetation. They can lead to crop depletion, increased vehicle collisions, and the facilitation of disease spread, like Lyme disease, chronic wasting disease, and even COVID-19. It's important to note that the word overabundance is a reflection of human values and perceptions and not biological thresholds. Opposed to biological carrying capacity, which is the density of deer that a parcel can physically accommodate, cultural carrying capacity reflects human sensitivity to deer, and it's a function of the maximum number of deer that can coexist with people. You can imagine that this number is hard to define and agree upon. To combat unwanted impacts of overabundant deer populations, management techniques usually rely on lethal methods such as hunting and sharpshooting. Non-lethal methods like fertility control and relocation are also options, but they can be highly labor-intensive and sometimes very expensive, which can usually make them infeasible. Some areas have tried predator reintroductions, like the wolves in Yellowstone and even in Colorado, but these methods are very complex and therefore pretty uncommon. And many places don't have any management strategy for deer because either they don't perceive deer to be an issue or for some other reason, but the consideration of one is becoming more pressing as deer populations and conflicts are on the rise. The social science team of this project sent out surveys to representatives of each municipality in New York and Massachusetts with a really high response rate, so thank you all who participated in that. And they asked questions like, do you think that deer numbers have grown? Will they continue to grow? And are deer a concern? At a town scale, the majority said that yes, deer populations have grown, but no, they will not continue to grow, and generally no, they're not a concern. But even though the majority said that deer are not a concern, in some places, like in New York in 2021 in our survey, the minority can represent 1/3 of the community. And that means that 1 out of 3 people are saying that there is a concern with deer, and that can be a big issue depending on the context. These surveys, and those specifically designed for hunters, are ongoing and being evaluated as we speak. So if deer can be a concern, then what is the broader problem? Recently, hunter recruitment and the amount of land access available for hunting have been declining, calling into question the sustainability of hunting as a management strategy, despite the historic reliance on this method as a cornerstone of controlling deer populations in America. Sharpshooting has also been implemented in a range of states such as New York, and it's often used in urban areas where traditional hunting is infeasible due to safety concerns. Many people have questioned the ethics behind this method, however, and whether it has localized impacts versus regional population control impacts. In America, municipalities can independently implement deer management, independent of other surrounding communities, and this can lead to a disjointed management landscape, causing some people to wonder what the ecological and social implications may be of such coordination. So for this research, my overarching dissertation question was, how can New England white-tailed deer populations be effectively managed in the face of evolving ecological dynamics, shifting stakeholder interests, and the influence of coordination among municipalities? You'll notice underlying themes from these diagrams throughout this research, where I balanced ecological, social, and theoretical dimensions with the aim of comprehensively evaluating white-tailed deer management in New England. My dissertation structure consisted of 5 chapters, with the first being the introduction, and then 3 body chapters that represent standalone research stories intended for individual publication, and then a conclusion chapter. Chapter 2 focused on assessing whether there are enough hunters and enough land access in New England to effectively manage local deer. Specifically, I asked, how do deer respond to different levels of hunters? How does land access influence the amount of hunters needed to maintain deer populations at 0 growth? And how do social preferences in hunting and land access shape the outcomes? Chapter 3 assessed the feasibility of sharpshooting as a management strategy in New England, specifically asking, how does sharpshooting impact deer density? What theoretical insights can I gain? And what are the social attitudes regarding sharpshooting in these communities? Chapter 4 investigated the implications of white-tailed deer management coordination, asking, how do input parameters influence the ecological impact of deer? How is deer density shaped by management coordination? And how does management coordination influence public support? I focused on 11 strategically selected towns in New York and Massachusetts that captured a range of land cover types, land cover settings, deer management strategies, and deer-related issues. In New York, deer are managed partly by the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation, and in Massachusetts, it's Mass Wildlife. And we worked closely with these agencies throughout the project to make sure that our models were applicable to their current management practices and dilemmas, along with all of you from the community to make sure that our models are as informative as possible. And in Massachusetts, you can see the towns are Pepperell, Carlisle, Lincoln, Weston, Sharon, and Easton. And New York is Geddes, Clay, DeWitt, Manlius, and Fenner. Models are simplifications of some aspect of the world, and simulation models capture components of a real system that we can then experiment on to answer our research questions. Agents interact with each other in their shared environment to produce emergent system-level outcomes, with behaviors and dynamics driven by design objectives. In my models, the agents were deer, hunters, and sharpshooters. And I used a program called NetLogo for this research, which is a simple yet powerful platform with a built-in graphical interface and comprehensive documentation tools. So to make it a little more clear, I wanted to share a graphic with you about what agent-based models look like from a picture perspective. So this is a graphical depiction of how the modeling landscape works. At the bottom, you can see that there's land cover data, and in my case, this is generated from the National Land Cover Dataset in GIS. And the middle layer shows the patches or cells that pixelate the land cover data and define the dominant characteristics in each cell. For my models, I didn't depict variation within a cell. So you can see, for example, there's either a cell of forest or grassland or water or development. And then on the top layer, agents are added to the landscape where they can interact with each other and their shared environment. The spatially explicit models captured real landscape data of the focal towns from the National Land Cover Dataset, depicting regions of urbanization seen here in red, forest in green, grasslands in yellow, wetland in light blue, and open water in dark blue. And here's just a few examples of some different towns that I worked on. Like all models, settling on estimates can be challenging and ultimately requires a little leap of faith. For example, I estimated open hunting access by assuming that any land without restrictions could be open to hunting. And restrictions include road and housing legal setbacks and any local bylaws or restrictions that introduce further limitations. And because this is such a rough estimate, I assessed all ranges of hypothetical access from 0 to 100% of the town to identify thresholds that result in a deer population effect. And here you can see 25% of this town open to hunting access and 50 and 75 represented in orange. And other estimates came from state wildlife agencies, expert opinion, the literature, or from our surveys that we deployed to municipal representatives and hunters. I also created theoretical models that are extreme simplifications of the deer management system. And the purpose of this was to get at the simple underlying mechanisms that guide the system to address theory. I analyzed 3 spatial scales, where scale 1 represents a single town, scale 2 is a central town with 1 layer of surrounding towns, and scale 3 is a central town with 2 layers of surrounding towns. Spatial scale 1 focused on understanding the management dynamics within a single town, where scales 2 and 3 aimed to answer the broader question of how neighboring towns and their management strategies impact each other. All towns were as similar as possible, with the same areas, land covers, and starting deer populations, but the one factor that I switched was the management strategy, and that was whether a town implemented hunting, sharpshooting, both, or neither. And for scales 2 and 3, I tested what I'm calling similarity thresholds, where, for example, 0, 25, 50, 75, or 100% of the surrounding towns from the central town shared the same management strategy as that central town, and the rest of the towns have no management. So ultimately, this model addressed how much coordination was necessary to make impactful changes to local deer populations, or at what point surrounding towns with opposing strategies negated those efforts. And this graphic should make that a little more clear. This is what the models looked like for a few examples at all 3 scales. The first one shows hunting within a single town, and hunting is the yellow area, huntable areas, open access areas. And scale 2 shows hunting and sharpshooting, and urban areas are red. The sharpshooters were programmed to stay within those urban areas. And scale 2 in the middle shows 50% similarity of surrounding towns sharing the same management as that central town, so 2 out of 4. And then scale 3 on the right shows hunting as the central strategy with 75% similarity among surrounding towns. And you can see that each town has the same amount of hunting land, but it is randomly distributed in patches to reflect real heterogeneous hunting access across the landscapes. And all parameters for this model were calculated by taking the averages of all 11 focal towns in the spatially explicit models, and then applying those averages to get at this underlying theory. What's the average dynamics that are going on in New England? And one of the key outputs of this model was the deer density in towns without management versus the deer density in towns with management. So you can see that here in blue. And I wanted to take a minute to show you guys what NetLogo looks like and how it works. So this is what the interface looks like, and it's all super customizable. I created all of these different boxes and selections to get at the core of this research. So here I selected sharpshooting as the central strategy. I'm looking at scale 1 with 75%, well, the similarity doesn't matter for scale 1 because there's only one town. And then we have different values looking at the sharpshooter density, hunter density, initial deer density, and the amount of access. I'll fast forward here a little bit so you can see it running. So it populates the model, the landscape, with the hunters, with the deer, and when the model runs, you can see they move around the landscape there, and these are the outputs, all the things that I'm interested in. And this is called pattern-oriented modeling, where I dig through the literature, talk to experts, and try to get as many statistics as I can. So what's the average sex ratio? How many deer, how many fawns are does having? Everything that I can get my hands on, I incorporate into the model. Oh, there you go. And so that is what helps it align with reality as much as possible. And I also conducted fieldwork by visiting each of the focal towns that I mentioned and meeting with State Wildlife Agency representatives to promote the realism of the model landscapes. So I'm sure you guys are familiar with these pictures, but they were new to me. And once I settled on my final models, after aligning the model behaviors with a variety of real system patterns, I was ready to produce the results. I ran each scenario 30 times and took the average to produce graphs such as these. And here's an example of the town of Weston showing low hunter density on the left, medium hunter density in the center, and high hunter density on the right. And medium hunter density is the current estimate based on the licensed sales. And low hunter density is half of the current estimate, and high is double the current estimate. So that was just kind of the rule of thumb that I stuck to. And on the x-axis, you can see the percent open hunting access of the town, ranging from 0 to 100% of the town theoretically being open to hunting. And on the y-axis is the percent deer population change after 10 years of consistent management. So that's how long I ran the models, was 10 years. And the purpose of these graphs was to identify the x-intercept, or the point of inflection where the amount of land access for hunters resulted in 0 growth of the deer population. So you can see Weston here, I'm looking at the center graph. The curve crosses the x-intercept around 20%. So that would tell me that the model suggests that about 20% of land access is currently needed to keep the deer population at 0% growth. And importantly, I'm looking at 0 growth. I'm not looking at bringing the deer population down. So that would be, anything above that 20% or below the x-axis. That's what the model suggests. And after taking the estimates for each town and for each hunter density level, I used box plots to assess the differences between Massachusetts on the left and New York on the right. And the current and high hunter density estimates were statistically different between the two states, with New York requiring slightly more land access to maintain their deer numbers than Massachusetts. For Chapter 3, I created similar plots for each town that examined the amount of sharpshooter access potentially required to maintain the local deer population. Because hunter recruitment and land access are declining, I assessed the current estimates, which is on the left, the current estimate of land access for hunters and sharpshooters, and I assessed how the sharpshooter requirement would change with a 25% reduction in the center here. In both hunter density and land access, and also what it would look like with a 50% reduction in hunter density and hunting land access. So this is kind of theoretically looking into the future. 3 of the 11 towns that we looked at currently implement sharpshooting in real life, so I averaged these statistics to overlay parameter estimates on the towns that don't have sharpshooting to theoretically assess its effects. So those 3 towns I used as a model for the other towns. And these were the box plots that I created with those data, with the only statistically significant difference being the 25% reduction in land access and hunter density between the 2 states, with New York on the left and Massachusetts on the right. But more important than the exact numbers are the trends. Though these agent-based models can produce valuable numerical results, the models are intended to assess complex system dynamics, with the trends holding more value than the actual numbers. So you can see that as hunter density and land access decline, moving right on the x-axis, higher levels of sharpshooting access may be required to maintain local deer populations. and this passes the, assumption test. Does this make sense? Yeah, it makes sense. If we have less hunters and less hunting access, something else will need to fill that void if you want to have the same population effect on the deer. These bar charts depict the sensitivity analysis from Chapter 3, showing how differences in hunting access on the left, differences in the hunter population in the center, and the initial deer population on the right influence the outcomes. And current estimates are in red, and the other bars show deviation, so where the model just explored theoretically what could this outcome look like. And of course, when there was no hunting access, the deer population grew. That's why you can see that big bar at 0%, 0% hunting access. And low and high hunter populations produced different results on the deer density. And this highlights the delicate role that hunters play in this system. And when you manipulate that number, or if hunters decline, the deer population responds to that. And a low deer population also changed the results, but a high one didn't so much, perhaps suggesting that lower populations are easier to manipulate and manage. I also identified some of the key stakeholder groups involved and plotted them based on power and interest. And the most important thing to take away here is that this is just one perspective of a really complex and dynamic stakeholder system, as you all know. These balances are constantly shifting from one point in time to the next, and they can be vastly different from one town to another. So my goal here as an ecological scientist was to just take a peek into the social side and try to get some average dynamics and include all the different perspectives that we could be seeing in this New England deer management system. And then moving on to results from Chapter 4, this bar chart shows the results at scale 1, so remember that's just one single town in isolation. And on the y-axis is the deer density change after 10 years. And the bars show the outcomes of no management, no harvest, sharpshooting, hunting, and both hunting and sharpshooting, both lethal methods. And the starting deer density was around 30 deer per square mile, and again that was taken from the average of all the focal towns, so that's seen in that red line there, the horizontal line. So the results suggest that only the combination of hunting and sharpshooting could effectively lower deer density in the focal towns. And you might be wondering if sharpshooting is really less effective than hunting, but it is important to remember that this is the theoretical model, and it was designed to capture average dynamics of the current state of deer management in New England. It used averages across all the towns, with only a few actually implementing sharpshooting. So here, this graph is saying that sharpshooting has less of an impact on New England white-tailed deer, perhaps because it is just less commonly used, at least from the sampled towns that we looked at. So this data suggests that, on average, hunting appears to have a more widespread impact on deer population control in the region compared to sharpshooting. And this chart shows the results of hunting and sharpshooting together at scale 3, with management similarity on the x-axis and deer density on the y. So over here we have 100% of the towns are all doing the same management. And the trends are clear. As coordination of lethal management increases, deer density decreases. Pretty straightforward. But interestingly, as coordination increases in the towns with lethal management, deer density also declines in towns without management, suggesting that the impacts of sharpshooting can extend beyond the towns that implement it. So you can see that these light gray bars are also going down despite the fact that there is no lethal management occurring in those towns. So again, that demonstrates that indirect effect that lethal management could have on areas that are not implementing any management, lethal management. And this graph shows the effect of sharpshooting and hunting across scales and different similarity thresholds. On the x-axis is scale 1, 2, and 3, and on the y is the deer density after 10 years, and the bars show increasing similarity with the darker shades. So you can see at scale 1 there is no similarity threshold because it's only one town, so that's why there's only one bar. And the red line shows the initial deer density, which again is around 30 deer per square mile. And we can see that only scale 1 and 100% coordination reduce the deer density below that initial level. So this bar and these two dark bars of 100% coordination. Compared to scales 2 and 3, coordinating in smaller areas had more effective results than the same level of coordination at larger scales, perhaps demonstrating the scale-dependent efficacy of management. So here, even though these are the same similarity thresholds, you can see that the deer densities are just a little bit higher, maybe because there's more area and the deer can hide in refuges in areas where there's no hunting allowed. And previous studies have found similar conclusions, like Fattorini et al. In 2020, who studied management efficacy across scales for various ungulate species. They found that as the spatial scale of management implementation increased on the x-axis, so did its efficacy on the y. And another study by Van Buskirk et al. In 2021 also found that the size of management area was one of the most influential factors in reducing local deer density, along with surrounding deer density and the antlerless harvest rate. These graphs show the sensitivity analysis results from Chapter 2, showing a low initial deer population on the left, a medium initial deer population, or current in the center, and a high population on the right. And on the x-axis, or axes, are the hunter population, and on the y is the deer population change after 10 years of consistent management. And the colored lines show different access levels of the town, ranging from 0 to 100% of the town being open to hunting. And the black arrows highlight the general functional relationships between hunter number and deer population change, which can be thought of as a proxy to hunter effort. These graphs show that the initial deer population changes the functional relationship and the resulting hunter effort required to impact the local deer population. So with a low deer population on the left, the results indicate that less hunters are needed to have a substantial impact. And with the current estimate in the center, hunters generally have a 1-to-1 impact. But with a high population on the right, it may take a higher hunter density to make that deer population start to decline. These results echo a previous paper by Van Deelen and Etter in 2003 that also found different functional relationships in this single predator, single prey system. The first graph shows prey density on the x-axis and prey per time or effort on the y. And there can be either a type 1, 2, or 3 curve. Type 1 is a linear relationship, which is often assumed, where half as many deer require twice the effort. And type 2 is a hyperbolic curve that reaches an asymptote when predator culling abilities are saturated. So when we can't have any more hunters, they just have the same effect no matter how many more we add. And type 3 is a sigmoidal curve where prey switching occurs. So perhaps when hunters start to select deer, if they perceive that the numbers are high enough and worth their effort, maybe they'll go from grouse to deer. And they suggest that single predator, single prey systems, such as this hunter-deer system, should exhibit a type 2 or a type 3 relationship, though linear, the type 1 is often assumed. And in the second graph here, you can see that if the perception is a linear relationship, but reality is hyperbolic, then this could mean that hunters become ineffective below a certain asymptotic threshold, never reducing deer below a certain density. And this could lead to a perception gap in the amount of effort hunters must exert to harvest deer, perhaps indicating levels of realistic effort required for removal. So this is pretty technical, but the big takeaway here is that the effort that hunters need to exert, or sharpshooters, to change the deer population changes with the initial number of deer that we have. Smaller deer populations are just easier to manage. And here are some graphs that show the town size on the x-axis and the percent of hunting access of the town required to maintain the deer on the y. And these are just some other results that I found that I thought were really interesting. 3 hunter densities are plotted, and this shows that higher hunter densities result in lower land access requirements. So the darker line is high hunter density and the lighter line is low. Another trend is that larger towns require more hunting access to have the same effect, which makes sense. If your town increases, there's going to be more spots for deer to hide, and higher hunter density is needed if you want to have the same deer population impact. Based on these results, I created ecological and social management recommendations for the focal towns, which included suggestions for continuous monitoring of deer populations and stakeholder interests, and the promotion of data-driven decisions to inform management, the implementation of adaptive management to shift practices as systems evolve, and to promote efficiency such as management coordination when stakeholders are in support, and of course the inclusion of stakeholders, the investigation of alternatives to see which options align with the unique social and ecological goals and contexts of each community, and the exploration of incentives such as states paying landowners to open their property for hunting access. And yes, of course. So I wanted to mention some of the limitations of this research and group them into 4 categories. Logistic limitations consisted of factors like time and funding, which most projects are constrained by. And theory limitations included factors like scope, where these models were created with the data from New England. Oops. And sorry, I got a call there. Okay, so the data were made from New England, so the results are probably just applicable to this region, and they should be applied elsewhere with great caution, if at all. And data limitations included gaps and uncertainties, but I mitigated these through a variety of model verification and validation strategies that aligned the model dynamics with the real system patterns to address the phenomena of interest. And lastly, model limitations included factors like all hunters and all deer having the same behavior, which isn't super realistic, or the model representing a closed system that didn't incorporate immigration or emigration. And though these are simplifications of the real system, these decisions allowed me to focus on the research question and get at the underlying dynamics, which was the whole goal of this research. I also included recommendations for future researchers to expand upon this project, and for ecological scientists, I suggested monitoring the long-term impacts of different management strategies across contexts and assessing direct and indirect effects of different management types, such as forest regeneration dynamics. And for philosophers or those interested in theory, I suggested continuous improvement and refinement of models such as these to better align the models with reality and produce meaningful outcomes. I also suggested developing models like this for other regions, other species, and other conflicts and contexts. And for social scientists, I suggested further investigating the stakeholder attitudes and preferences involved in these systems and exploring how and why they change over time. I also thought analyzing regulatory frameworks and governance structures could provide further insight into this system. Based on the results, and going back to my initial question, my conclusions from Chapter 2 were that low hunter density reduces hunter efficacy, whereas high hunter density slightly improves hunter efficacy, and low hunter density requires almost twice as much land access to achieve similar effects, and the efficacy of hunting as a management strategy is intricately tied to stakeholder support. From Chapter 3, I concluded that the efficacy of sharpshooting depends on the hunter and deer populations along with the land access percent. And as hunter density and land access decline, sharpshooting programs may need more access to have similar deer population effects. and the success of these programs highly hinges on stakeholder support. And from Chapter 4, it concluded that the initial deer, hunter, and sharpshooter densities, as well as the amount of land access, all influenced deer density and the resulting ecological impacts that those deer had. And higher levels of lethal management coordination result in smaller deer populations in areas with and without active management. And management coordination can either enhance or undermine public support depending on the context. So, how can New England white-tailed deer be effectively managed in the face of evolving ecological dynamics, shifting stakeholder interests, and the influence of coordination among municipalities? To boil it down to a sentence, I concluded that the efficacy of white-tailed deer management in New England can be enhanced with continuous monitoring, involving stakeholders, assessing alternatives, providing incentives, and prioritizing coordination. In the end, I hope that this research contributes to the development of white-tailed deer management practices that promote sustainable relationships between communities and resident wildlife. And I want to give a special thanks to all the collaborators, especially all of you and the Focal Town residents and my committee members. And I'd also like to thank all of you for being here today, and I would love to answer any questions from you guys at this time. Thank you.
Well, that was great, Allie. There's a lot.
Oh boy.
A lot in there. Wow. I'm glad it's recorded because I could watch that like 4 more times to pick up some of the nuances. But you did a great job, I think, of really spelling out the different components of your research, what you contributed and what factors that you involved, and some of the overall conclusions. So that was a really good presentation.
Thank you.
We do have a question that's already been put in the chat. And again, people are welcome to put more questions or raise their virtual hands. Allie, I don't know if you want me to read the question from the chat or if you want to handle it. I can read it to you if you'd like.
Sure.
The question from Barney Arnold is from Carlisle, is where were there towns in the study that have actually been following deer management plans for 10 years or more, ? Or were you extrapolating from towns with fewer years of management?
Yeah, that's a great question. We have not been doing this research project for 10 years. This is a relatively new project. So as far as I know, at least our project has not been tracking towns for that 10-year duration. It's been 2, 3, 4 years maybe. And the models relied on extrapolating that information. And that's kind of the whole point of these agent-based models, is to explore things where either, ethically you can't or feasibly you can't, or in this case, it's kind of, they're not supposed to be predictive models, but it's kind of looking into the future. If we take these dynamics and extend them, how could this unfold in the future? And the purpose is just to provide a conversation and provide material to discuss and talk about and see what the model thinks could result if we continue these methods.
Allie, do you mind if I just clarify something on that too?
Absolutely, yeah.
Hi, all. I'm John Casais-Connors. I'm an assistant professor in geography at Texas A&M and one of the co-PIs on this project with Ann Short, who's the principal investigator at Boston University, who's on here too. Regarding that question, Barney, so there's a couple layers to the study. So in the layout for where you saw how there was the multiple communities in Massachusetts and New York, the ways that we selected for those in-depth case studies, the towns, did have to do with choosing pairs of towns, ones that were neighboring each other, that had existing deer management plans in place, and others that did not. So the presumption there being that these towns and nearby places would have similar ecological conditions. Allie's piece of this is not derived directly from observation of what has changed with deer populations in those towns based on their management activities. She is deriving models based on what we know about population dynamics of deer and how much the populations change from year to year, a little bit in relevance to what different conditions are that affect those population changes, and then seeing if there's different strategies of hunting that basically just affect how quickly the population changes for deer. So with those different approaches in place and different levels of intensity, what types of strategies might work in some places and not others. And importantly, do they work when a town goes at it alone, or do they work better if a town takes on that activity in coordination with neighboring towns? And that has two things. One, she's showing sort of what those strategies can or can't do, but also maybe that different levels of intensity of hunting may be possible under coordination, or different levels of intensity may be necessary initially, and then open pathways to less intense management later on. So, but to your question about the management piece, our survey design and our ongoing monitoring of actual deer populations does try to capture some towns that have management plans and those that don't. Jamie, who's on the call here, he's doing work on that, and that's not fully integrated into what Ali's done so far. Mm-hmm. He's the one who's set up, Jamie's got the hundreds of camera traps set up across those 11 towns and has been actively collecting information on the presence of deer and measurements of their impacts on vegetation to try to get better estimates of deer populations in those towns that we're looking at, and to compare if the densities of deer are different in those with management and those without, or the impacts on vegetation are different in those with management and those without. So that piece, there is an additional set of studies that we are doing that get more specifically at that comparison across them. And I just did want to note on the sharpshooting, we do know that Massachusetts sharpshooting is pretty much off the table, right? Massachusetts doesn't do sharpshooting. So all the examples of sharpshooting are from New York that we were discussed in our case studies. But again, this is more, Ali is sort of presenting different, if strategies were available or if different approaches were available, what would they look like? Not necessarily saying that that particular prescription is possible in Massachusetts communities, because right now it'd be very unlikely to see any sharpshooting take place in Massachusetts towns.
Thank you, John.
Yeah, so yeah, I'd love to hear from other people. Any other questions you have? The one thing I'll just mention that probably is in a lot of our minds, having especially towns that have been through the deer management processes, when and as your study mentioned, stakeholder interest and support is huge in this, and that's of course one of the critical difficulties when we're dealing with wildlife populations, is how to make how to have a conversation about wildlife control, deer control, when obviously there's a lot of emotional, social concerns about that. And I think what really comes to the surface on a lot of these conversations is people wanting quantitative data that by introducing hunting, you will decrease the deer numbers. And I think the challenge that a lot of our Metro West communities have, of course, is hunter access is low. Even if you are opening conservation land or, land trust land, it's still only a certain percentage. And the fact that it's tough to actually know the specific numbers of deer in a particular community, Yeah. So I think what we heard a lot in Weston was people wanting that concrete evidence. What is the population today of the deer in Weston? How is that changing by this proposed hunting program? And that's it's basically impossible to answer, because unless you're actually tagging and trapping or somehow monitoring the numbers, it's difficult to see that change, particularly because they of course deer are moving through town boundaries. So those are kind of the struggles I think that happen at a local level when you're considering deer management and how to have. But I think to your study, this is great evidence on sort of, at least on paper, what can happen when these different measures are implemented.
Yeah, absolutely. And what John was saying, Jamie is doing the camera trap studies right now, so those are pretty darn intensive, and that is kind of getting at the best estimates that we can have in these focal towns that we're looking at. And as those data are discovered, he's going to be sharing them with me, and I'll be reprogramming the models, consistently updating them. They're really living documents, living models, so that we can see, does that change the outcomes at all? So they're always able to get more information and update as that becomes available. And another thing that comes to mind, you're kind of talking about this ultimate dilemma of deer management, which I kind of discovered through this research, is this trade-off between regional deer management, being able to control and manage deer across large scales, and accommodating diverse stakeholders. As you grow these scales, you're going to have more people involved, more diverse opinions, and it's really hard to balance those two. And that's kind of, I think, what the discussion is. Do we want this regional control, or do we want to accommodate stakeholders? And it's really this trade-off, and it's very complex.
Yeah, very much so. And there's a couple questions that came in that I'll see if you've got answers for. Christina asked, has the model been applied to contraceptive control? Question mark. Why the assumption that the solution is only hunting?
Yeah, it really just came down to a time constraint and how I wanted to parse out my time exploring different management strategies. So I just looked at hunting and sharpshooting. Those seem to be kind of the two most popular ones, most talked about, mostly implemented. So of course there are all the other ones that I talked about, and we are actually looking into incorporating those into the model. I'm doing a semester postdoc position to expand this model further, and we'll possibly be looking at including these other management strategies like fertility control and relocation and everything else you can think about.
Mm-hmm. And I'll go ahead.
Sorry, I just want to add one other piece for the reason that Allie's approached the models this way too, is that as of right now in Massachusetts, at least, also the use of immunocontraception, the options for that are quite limited. And in general, also in New York, these require a different type of permitting mechanism to undertake them. So they are being looked at and they are on the table. What this means for the model that Allie just shared with you, well, at the end of the day, really all her model does is makes some assumptions about the relationship between the hunting density and the changes in the death and birth rate of deer. So what she's presented to you today, actually, she's starting to look into taking the steps to say, okay, so what information do we have on changes in birth rates related to immunocontraception, for instance? And if we were to put that information in to change the birth rate of the deer in the model, well, what happens for the outcome? So the groundwork she's laid here for this modeling of looking at hunting methods first can be extended. But the other piece of it is she needs that information on how the birth and death rates do change in response to this. And so there's, it's easier to sort of derive that information related to how hunting programs affect the death rates of deer, because we have much more information on deer harvest rates by hunters, as opposed to the limited number of studies on immunocontraception to fold into the model. But we're working on that. We have been in conversation with folks who are involved with working on immunocontraception and thinking about how to bring some of that information in as well.
Great. And I'll just note from a Massachusetts standpoint, when Weston was going through this very intensive review and assessment of deer management, one of the contributors, Brian Donnie, who's on the Zoom today, the commission wrote a pretty extensive assessment of deer management options in Weston, and there is a section on immunocontraception, and like you just said, John, is that I'm sorry, is that your name? It's not John, is it? It's okay.
I'm John. My last name's Casillas Connors. It just pops up as last name first.
Got it. Okay, just apologize. John referenced, Massachusetts is incredibly difficult to consider immunocontraception right now, and that's a whole different topic that we should talk about at some point as this deer group. So this is going to, I think, be a good segment or some jumping off points for future conversations with this group, because I know that's a topic. I'm sensitive to time. I know some people have to leave at noon. I'm happy to stay on longer, and if Allie's able to stay on a few minutes, we can answer this. But there was a question for Jamie, and I don't know if Jamie's willing to chat about it, because I think it's a good one too, is Jamie's doing this field camera work in a number of the focal towns. And so maybe, Jamie, you can just mention which ones. Are they all the focal towns that Allie discussed, and how long you plan to continue collecting your data?
Yeah, so I'm, for those of you who don't know, my name is Jamie Gottlich. I'm a PhD candidate on this project now. And I've been doing a lot of camera work, like they said. But all of the focal towns in Massachusetts and New York have cameras out there right now, and they've been out since summer of 2021. And so this project is kind of coming to an end, or at least my portion of the project is coming to an end this coming March. But at least in the Massachusetts towns, we're hoping to extend it depending on grant funding and that kind of thing.
Perfect. And we do look forward to seeing your results too, Jamie. That will be excellent. And the other thing, I think you just mentioned that you might have just put in the chat, John. I was going to ask Allie. It sounds like the research is obviously complete. I assume there's a publication. Is it available for folks to view, and is that what's been posted on the chat?
Yes, John shared kind of our larger project that we're working on, but my actual dissertation, which is just a piece of that is available online, and we're working on manuscripts for publication right now. So those are not available, but yeah.
So is your dissertation at that website as well?
It's not there, but I can send that to you and have it.
Yeah, you could always send it to me, and when I send out an email blast to folks after this, I can include that.
Great.
Any other questions that people have for Allie today? Or John, or Jamie?
Just so much wonderful material to think about. Thank you, Allie.
Thank you guys. I'm so glad that you guys could make it. I really appreciate the opportunity to share this with you guys.
Excellent. Well, I do hope this will start sort of a larger conversation with some of our Metro West communities about the topic. I think it's certainly, we've got some great examples of towns that have implemented fairly successful deer management programs, and I know a lot of towns are struggling with their deer population and how best to manage them as well. And I think this will be very useful for that group. So thank you, Allie, and thank you for everyone who attended today.
Can I say one last thing?
Sure.
So I didn't want to steal any of Allie's thunder, but I know a bunch of the Exclosure folks around here, and I'll probably have some information to you, Michelle, by Monday on the initial analysis for the Exclosure stuff.
Awesome. So yeah, just to mention to folks who don't know, and this is actually a good follow-up to Barney's question that asked about regional discussions. There are a number of towns and nonprofits who have been meeting fairly regularly on the topic, more associated with this deer exclosures, that we do have deer exclosures that are set up in Concord, Lincoln, Weston, Lexington, SVT property, Mass Audubon property, may have forgotten any others, Concord Land Conservation Trust property. And they've been set up for over 10 years now. And there's very intensive data collection that happened in sort of the 2013, 14, again, 2019, 18-ish time. And also this past summer, we've reevaluated that. And what we do have is these 30 foot by 30 foot exclosures, so fenced in areas where deer can't access. And then we have control plots that deer can access near them. And we are looking at seedling growth, seedling quantity, and a number of other sort of factors and variables in those exclosures and control plots. Jamie has graciously offered to use his statistical brain and sort of see what kind of change in vegetation we've been seeing over the last 10 years of these study plots in the exclosures and outside. And I think that too will help contribute to sort of an understanding on, what's happening to the vegetation if, are there exclosures showing better increased growth of vegetation versus outside? And also, is there a difference in some of the towns that have productive deer management, deer hunting programs happening? Are we seeing more improvement of our seedling understory plants, even in the control plots? Because ultimately, we are hoping to see our forest understory doing better in towns that have active deer management, hoping that the numbers of deer are either stabilizing or decreasing ultimately would be the goal in a lot of those towns. With that, again, I'll be sending out a follow-up for folks to chat more about this. I'll stay on for a couple minutes, so if people have questions about this group or about deer management, I'm happy to offer that up. But I do thank everyone for coming, especially Allie and your team for this wonderful presentation. And what an amazing amount of material that you've been able to process. And we look forward to your future information as well.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'll stick around to answer any other questions if there are any.
Super. It's just incredible how, like, I'm sure labor intensive these data models can just become when you start to factor in different variables and understanding how you need to limit the variables because it can just get so complicated. It definitely, I'm wishing I had more Cheerios this morning to kind of get my brain synapses to fire a little faster on that stuff because there was a lot going on. But I do appreciate you really communicating it all. I know we had a short amount of time, so it was a really well done presentation with a lot of input.
Thanks. Yeah, it was very, very dense. A lot of things to look at. Hopefully, it wasn't too overwhelming, but yeah.
Well, it kind of was, but it was good. It was good overwhelming.
Okay.
Sorry, could you tell me who's asked the question? I think it wasn't in the main chat regarding the immunocontraception, the other one. You said it was Christina, was that right?
I think it was in the main chat.
Or was the one Jeannie asked then?
Christina asked the question about the one I read out. Has the model been applied to contraceptive control, and why the assumption that the solution is only hunting?
So I wanted to, just one thing I will add on the immunocontraception thing for those who are asking about it is just that an important question then also to understand for looking into hunting isn't necessarily always to say that this is the solution, but in looking at if this is generally presented as the primary management strategy, part of also what we're looking at through these models is, does the way this is being implemented yield the promised effects? So I would just also urge people, like, as you see the model and the model results, not to take it as a policy prescription, but to recognize it is just trying to create a mechanism by which to analyze whether or not the strategies we are implementing are effective and what it actually would entail even if those strategies were used for them to be effective. So that is another reason, even if you are interested in advancing and supporting immunocontraception as a strategy, that creating this type of information may be important for it.
Understood. David, you have your hand raised.
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation. So I'm from the Select Board of Carlisle, like Barney, and so sharpshooting, I get it, right? That's actually people with rifles, right? Which, as you mentioned, is not allowed in Massachusetts, but we do have pretty active conversations and have implemented at times bow and arrow. Did you look at anything? Does that correlate in any way to sharpshooting?
I didn't specifically look at it, but I would assume that you can kind of think of it, my sharpshooting, like it could be any mechanism. It's really just an effort to lower the deer population through a different mechanism.
Right.
So I think you can kind of think of it the same way, but the reason that I didn't look at that is because we don't have as many statistics, and what I was relying on for the models was the towns that already have sharpshooting, so I took those stats. Right. So, I mean, you can kind of think of it like that, but it's not directly.
Well, it's useful. Barney, you're still on, right? I think it's useful. It's a very hot, it's a very contested topic, and we kind of retreated from it, after just getting too much negative blowback, right? But, the takeaway from your data in part is that the combination approach is the most effective. I did notice in one of your slides, you put the word Carlisle, Mass, but was it really an amalgam or a proxy for small towns? That wasn't truly Carlisle, right? Your slide that says Carlisle on it?
So I'm not sure if I understand the question, but we looked at the 11 focal towns, so they're all kind of represented.
Well, there was a chart. One of your charts had the title. It was of Carlisle, and it had graphs of things. I don't remember.
That is actually Carlisle.
That is actually Carlisle.
But take it with a grain of salt this moment, because of course this is based on a lot of assumptions about efficacy rates of hunting and such right now. So it is not directly representing what the hunting efficacy is in Carlisle at the moment. Correct?
Okay, well, there's no hunting in Carlisle, so I guess, yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
exactly. So
Okay.
I'm sorry, or what it had
So
been in
on
the past
private land.
programs.
Yeah.
On
So
private
Barney,
land hunting.
okay. So Barney, I mean, I don't want to make this about Carlisle, but I would just say we should look at the data like presenters suggesting with sharpshooting as a proxy for bow and arrow. I mean, the data does suggest that you need some combination approach to control your deer population.
But I think David, I mean, Allie also had hunting as one of the categories, and I think bow and arrow would be more consistent with the hunting category.
Okay.
Hunting in Massachusetts is it's a lot of bow and arrow actually, and then it's also shotgun. You know, we have bow and arrow season and shotgun season. So I would associate the bow and arrow aspect as being sort of the category of hunting in Allie's presentation. Would that be correct, Allie?
Well, what I'm thinking, so what are the differences between these different strategies?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Yeah, and so in the models at least, the sharpshooters could stay within urban areas, you know, theoretically up to like 100% of the town, but the sharpshooters are in urban areas and the hunters are in more of the rural areas where you don't have those setbacks. So what I'm thinking, when my model says that a combination is more effective, it's because more of that total land access is open when you can accommodate both areas. And bow, I mean, that sounds, it's more safe than like guns in urban areas. So I would think that you'd be able to actually have an even greater area that you could access in urban regions with bow hunting compared to sharpshooting.
Yeah, I mean, the term urban and rural doesn't mean much in Carlisle, but I think trafficked and untrafficked, right? So the debate is about whether town land should be available to, or selected parts of town land should be available to bow and arrow hunting. And on those who are proponents of it make the same argument you're making, Allie. It's very accurate, it's very safe. They know what they're doing. They're just in a small confined area. Mm-hmm. And to me, they're more sharpshooting, right? They see a deer, they shoot it. It's not like going crazy. I don't know, you know, Barney knows a lot more than I do about private land shooting, but you know, it's its own thing. So I there's something to be extracted. Again, we don't have to tie up everybody here, but I might be useful, Barney, for us to circle back with this team and see if, I don't want to willy-nilly extract data from Allie's presentation, but there may be some useful things we can curate out of that we should just have. I don't know if we're ready ever to reignite the bow and arrow debate, but deer management is going to continue to be a problem. There's no question. So, Barney, do you want to say anything on that? Maybe not.
No, just I agree with you, David. And I think just one follow-up in my mind is, and Michelle, that would be helpful if you wanted to reach out, or is how could people in Carlisle that are interested in this, what's happening in the region, you know, what would be the best way to participate in that conversation and maybe learn from what some other towns are doing that might be helpful in Carlisle?
Sure. I'm happy to have either one of you, feel free to reach David or Barney, feel free to reach out to me, like conservation. My info's on my website, and I can also type it in here. But I'd love to have a conversation about that. One just caveat, David, I wanted to mention, and I know this gets into super emotional, super pro-con discussions. You know, there's a perception that like shotguns seem scarier. Like, I'm not a hunter. Shotgun seems scarier than bow hunting, but in Massachusetts, both shotgun and bow hunting are very effective means for deer management and are very safe measures of doing it. I think in some towns like Weston, we focused on bow hunting only because from a public perception standpoint, it seems more palatable. To your point, you can't shoot a deer as far as you can with a shotgun. You know, so it's a closer range thing, and it's, you know, we're using deer stand, so you shoot down. I say we still because it's 3 years ago. I still feel like I'm wet sometimes. So I think though that is a concern that a lot of residents pose and I think there's a lot of, you know, stigma and stereotypes about hunters, and I just want to caution this group, of course, that you know, hunters, you know, are conservationist. In any user group, yeah, you're going to have some yahoos, you're going to have crazy rock climbers, you're going to have crazy, divers, and yeah, there might be some hunters that are not as conservative, but when you're running a town managed hunting program like in Weston, we know all of the hunters. They're scouting the sites first. They're finding there's illegal deer stands on most conservation land in these towns. They find them. We have conversations with these hunters. Oftentimes they don't know where the property boundaries are. Oftentimes we don't know where our property boundaries are without GPSs. So, I think it's a bigger conversation to have. And to your point, residents are very torn by this, are very emotionally passionate about the conversation. And I think everyone believes in, wants an ethical approach to this. In my mind, shotgun and bow hunting can be ethical ways of managing the deer herd, and that ultimately is one of the big questions out there. I'm going to call on Christina first because her hand's been up for a while, and then I'll call on Ellie.
Thank you. Yeah, I just wanted to point out that there are a lot of studies that out there that actually indicate that bow hunting is very ineffective in comparison to rifle and shotgun hunting. The amount of misses, if you will, are much, much higher. And so just to throw out a different perspective, sharpshooting to me would indicate a professional with a rifle who would be much more effective at actually killing deer as opposed to recreational bow hunting hunters who statistics show have a very low efficacy in the number, in comparison, in the number of deers that are actually killed. And so I think there is indeed very much a difference in the type of hunting and the efficacy in relation to the type of hunting.
Thank you for that, Christina. Ellie, your hand's up. Oh, you just remuted yourself. You got it a second ago. Oh.
Am I unmuted?
Yes.
I would like to invite anyone who is on the call or maybe was on it before, if they are in this general area and have a strong interest in what's going on with our deer populations, if they would let us know, perhaps let you know, Michelle, and get the information back to us, to have them join our discussion group, which meets roughly monthly to go over many of these things. We had a beautiful presentation from Jamie. We are now very grateful to Allie for her presentation. We're looking at what's happening in surrounding communities and what might be of interest to this area. And we're also working with Mass Wildlife and other groups in the area. So please let us know if you'd like to be part of that conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you, Ellie. Janet, your hand's raised.
Yeah, thank you. Great presentation, by the way, Allie. I read a study that was put out by Connecticut Audubon several years ago, probably at least 10, maybe 15 years ago. And they were looking at birth control, and it doesn't work unless you have a contained population, because the deer, because you can't tell who got what dose, I guess, and I know there's also a more recent study. It's not just a study; it was a program that was implemented on Staten Island where they did vasectomies on male deer. That was very effective, but it's very labor intensive. I think it cost about $600 per deer on average. But they came in they identify where a deer was. They come in like a SWAT team and then anesthetize it quickly and do their surgery and so on. But again, it was a contained population. So I think that from what I have read, the take home on contraception is that it only works if you have a contained population. So I'd welcome any other. I wish it would work because, well, we've been running a program in our neighborhood for more than 15 years, I guess. It's a neighborhood association. We have deer hunting, bow hunting. They're usually not terribly effective. They usually get maybe 3 deer. I think they got maybe 5 or 6 this year, which is like an all-time record, but it's better than nothing. And part of the reason we've been doing it for years is to demonstrate that it can be done, and it's low impact. The neighbors don't even know it's. I mean, we tell them they have to sign a permission slip in order for hunting to take place anywhere near them. Anyway, it's been going on successfully for years, and it's we don't have any problems with it. Thank you.
And I'll just note with that same note, Janet, that in Weston, where they've been hunting now since 2012, it's all bow hunting. It's very successful. You know, over 30 deer per year are hunted on public land, and that's about at least 1 per hunter. So overall, when you think about the number of deer being taken by conservation land, 30 to 40. Number of deer car collisions, which in Weston is anywhere from 20 to 25 deer reported per year. And of course, a lot of people don't report their deer car collisions, so it's probably higher. And likely most deer that are hit by cars are often eventually die. And then when you think about either maybe a third to a quarter of fawns might be taken by our robust coyote population. Now you're talking, in the 3-digit numbers of deer being taken from the Weston environment. And so I believe when you factor all those in, it's quite a successful way to manage the deer herd and control the deer herd.
Well, we've had a continuing increase in the population here. And every September I go around and talk to all the new neighbors, and I just let them know that we have a hunting program here. And I give them the talk about deer car collisions, tick-borne diseases, and habitat destruction, not just your foundation plantings, but the wider forest, at which point most of them, their eyes glaze over because they don't have a good context for that. But I would like to add that in addition to Lyme disease, anaplasmosis, and babesiosis, we now have alpha-gal. Somebody in our neighborhood has alpha-gal. We're not sure where she picked it up. She works in Lincoln and has visited the Berkshires, but she lives here. And for those of you who don't know what it is, it's a mammal protein allergy. She can't eat beef, pork, or lamb. She can eat chicken, fish, can't eat any dairy products. And it's carried by the Lone Star tick, which is transported by deer, among other animals.
Janet, Barney asked, what town is that? Are you referring to what town?
What town am I in? Oh, what? I live in Concord, and I'm in Nersnack Hill. So if you're at the Prison Rotary on Route 2, and you see that, where the cows are, where the farm is, prison farm, well, I'm on the hill behind the cows.
And that's where you're saying you have this neighborhood effort going on.
Yes, we've been doing it for years. I'd have to go look at my records to remember when we started it. But we deal with hunters out of the Concord Rod and Gun Club. I think there are only 6 or 8 of them. There's a slight change in who's hunting what year, and there's always one particular one I work with. Half of them teach hunter safety. My main contact is a now retired Waltham policeman. So anyway, if you want to, we've actually met, Barney, and if you want to talk about this more offline, I can talk, but I don't have your phone number. I just have your email address.
I was going to say this is David Modell. We should coordinate. That was a question I had. What is Concord doing? And as usual, even though we're close neighbors, we don't always coordinate. So there must be a town-wide effort, right? Either through select board or some other group?
Not yet, David. So I think why don't we, and I think this is a great idea. What a great way to just connect people. I'm so glad this is happening. I will send out the Google Doc that will have everyone's email addresses, and I would say let's continue the conversation. Let's connect. This is obviously a major topic for many of our communities. So right now, Lincoln does not have an active deer management program on conservation land or town land. Neither does Concord, although Concord does have one land trust property, I think, open to hunting. So it's definitely something of interest to discuss more in both of these towns. And thank you, Allie, for posting her research link too. So that was great. I think with that, since it's almost 12:30 and I do have a 12:30 appointment, again, thank you all. This is wonderful. Allie, this has been tremendous. And I'll send a follow-up email to everyone as well. And Allie, if you have any other links or stuff you want me to send out, please feel free to email me and I can send it out to the group.
Okay, awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. That's great.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you all.